What if I told you there was a time when a single flower bulb was worth more than a house? No, seriously, get ready for a wild ride into the most absurd financial bubble in history, Tulip Mania!
All right, let's take a trip back in time, about 400 years, to talk about a flower that supposedly brought an entire nation of merchants to its knees. But did it really? This is the wild and honestly pretty misunderstood story of Tulip Mania, what a lot of people call the world's very first financial bubble. I want you to picture this. It's 1636. You're in the Netherlands. You walk into this dimly lit tavern, the air is thick with smoke, and you see men crowded around tables. But they're not trading gold or spices. Nope, they're trading little slips of paper. And these papers are just promises for flower bulbs that are still buried deep in the frozen ground outside. Yeah, this wasn't about gardening anymore. This was high-stakes finance. So you have to ask, right? How on earth does a simple flower become one of the most valuable things in the entire world? To really get the mania, we first have to understand the legend of the tulip itself. Okay, so to really get what was happening, you have to picture the time. The early 1600s, this was the Dutch Golden Age. I mean, trade was absolutely booming, and it created this whole new middle class that suddenly had cash to burn. And what do you do when you have money? You look for ways to show it off. And right on cue, this exotic new flower shows up from the Ottoman Empire, the tulip. It was gorgeous, it was new, and it was the perfect way to say, hey, look at me, I'm rich. But here's the thing, it wasn't just any old tulip. The ones that were worth a fortune were the broken tulips. They had these incredible flame-like stripes running up their petals. Now, we know today this was actually caused by a virus, but back then, it was like magic. You could never ever predict if a bulb would break, which of course made the rare ones the ultimate gamble and the most desirable things you could possibly own. So let's recap. You've got this hot new product and a market full of people with money to spend. It's kind of the perfect storm for what happens next, how simple excitement can spiral into the anatomy of a full-blown financial bubble. So, what exactly is a speculative bubble? Well, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's when the price of something, whether it's a stock, a house, or, a flower bulb, gets completely unhooked from what it's actually worth. The price has nothing to do with value anymore. It's all about hype. It's all emotion. And Tulip Mania, it is the textbook first ever recorded example of this. Okay, so how did this whole thing actually work? Well, it boils down to three key ideas. First, the value of a tulip wasn't based on anything real. It was just whatever the next guy was willing to pay for it, which leads right into number two, the greater fool theory. This is the belief that no matter how crazy the price you pay today is, there's always a greater fool out there who'll pay you even more tomorrow. And that leads to the final, most brilliant step, windhandel, which literally means wind trade. People stopped trading the bulbs themselves and started trading paper contracts. Think about that. They were literally trading the idea of a flower. And that leads us to the big question, the one that's at the heart of this whole crazy story. Just how high did these prices actually go? You might want to brace yourself because the answer is absolutely staggering. Get this. At its peak, a single high-end bulb, like the one called the Viceroy, could sell for 2,500 guilders. Now, to put that into perspective for you, that was more than 10 times the annual salary of a skilled craftsman. Imagine that, a single flower bulb costing more than 10 years of your life's work. It's just mind-blowing. And if you need more proof of just how insane this was, check this out. A real record from the time shows what somebody traded for just one of those Viceroy bulbs. You've got bushels of wheat and rye, livestock, tons of beer and wine, 1,000 pounds of butter, a bed, clothes, a silver cup, the whole shebang. For context, a fancy mansion on a canal in Amsterdam would have cost you about 5,000 guilders. So yeah, you could trade 2 flower bulbs for a mansion. It's completely absurd. But you know how this story goes, right? What goes up that fast? Well, it's gotta come crashing down. And the Great Tulip Crash wasn't just a little dip. It was a complete and total meltdown. And what's really shocking is just how fast it all fell apart. It all started one day in February 1637 at a totally normal auction in the city of Haarlem. The auctioneer called for bids, like he always did, and then silence. Just nothing. For the first time in years, nobody bought. That single moment of silence was all it took. Panic just ripped through the country. Within a few weeks, prices had crashed by over 90%. So why? Why did the bottom fall out so fast? Well, for one, they just ran out of greater fools. The prices got so ridiculously high that there was nobody left who could afford to get in on the game. Some historians also think an outbreak of the plague might have made people a little less willing to gamble. But the biggest thing? Trust just evaporated. Remember all those wind trade contracts? They were just promises. And when the prices fell, the buyers just walked away, leaving the sellers holding a bag full of worthless flowers.
Okay, but here's where the story gets really interesting. Because the version of Tulip Mania we all think we know, this huge national catastrophe, it might not be the whole truth. Let's dig into the myth versus the reality.
So the legend goes that the entire Dutch economy was basically destroyed, that everyone from the richest nobles down to the poorest maids was totally ruined. But, when modern historians actually dug into the records, they found a totally different story. The national economy, it was mostly fine. The trading was actually confined to a pretty small group of rich merchants. And since most of it was just paper trades, when the whole thing collapsed, most of the deals were just never settled. It was a crisis for sure, but a very contained one.
So if it wasn't a national disaster, where did this epic story come from? Well, it seems like the whole national catastrophe thing was largely propaganda. It was probably written by religious leaders at the time to be this big, powerful moral lesson about the dangers of greed. It was basically less about history and more about being a cautionary tale, a story that just got bigger and crazier every time it was told.
But hey, even if the crash itself wasn't this huge, widespread disaster, the psychology behind it, oh, that is very, very real. The story has kind of become this ghost that still haunts our markets today.
See, Tulip Mania is like a perfect case study in how our own brains can trick us. You've got social proof, right? That feeling of, well, if everyone's buying it, it must be a good idea. Then there's the endowment effect. The second we own something, even if it's just a promise on paper, our brain tells us it's way more valuable. And finally, the availability heuristic. We see a couple of people getting rich quick, and suddenly we think our chances of doing the same are way higher than they actually are. These things are just hardwired into us.
And this pattern just keeps repeating. I mean, think about the dot-com bubble in the late 90s. You had companies with zero profits valued at billions, all based on the idea of what they might do one day. That's pure wind trade. Or, hey, how about the 2008 housing crisis? That core belief that house prices would just go up forever, that there would always be a greater fool to buy you out. Sound familiar?
And you don't even have to look that far back. The whole crypto and NFT craze a few years ago, digital things with no real-world value being traded for millions, based almost entirely on hype and seeing other people do it. It's the same exact story.
And that really gets us to the core lesson of this whole thing. For so many assets, value is just a kind of collective hallucination. It's worth a lot because we all agree it's worth a lot. At the end of the day, a tulip is a beautiful flower. It's a work of art from nature, but it is not a house. Which really leaves us with one last kind of haunting question to think about. We know a tulip is just a flower, but what's the tulip of today? What are we all convinced is worth a fortune? That maybe, just maybe, future generations will look back on and just see a flower? Something to think about.
If you enjoyed this absurd dive into financial history, hit that like button and subscribe for more funny finance stories.